Guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today is a Q&A episode, and I have 3 questions I want to dive into. So let's dive into those. But actually, first, before I do that, I just want to give an announcement here. I am going to have my first child here in the next week or two. So by the time this is out, we may have already had him. Basically, what this means is I'm going to do my best to maintain my butt for the next couple weeks. Things may be a little spottier from that perspective, especially on the guest side of things. I think these solo episodes will be easy to still put out, but the guest ones, it's hard to get that set time commitment and then having to do it. I think I have all my guest episodes up, ready and roll till October. So I'm hoping that maybe if it's just 1 week. And what I would probably do on that week is I would put out like a replay of one of my favorite episodes over the last little bit as well too, just so then that way we still have something from that perspective to come out still with that. So just wanted to give you guys an update on that. Again, appreciate everybody who listens and anybody who listens regularly from that perspective. So cool. So first question of the day is favorite split for body recomp. So again, I think the first thing to go over here is going to be, all right, so what are we trying to accomplish with a body recomp? It's essentially losing some body fat and building muscle. And again, this is going to be on a long term. There's going to be a short term where you'll be able to do both for a period of time. And then long term, that's what we want to see happen there. So what this means is that a split, we're talking from a resistance training perspective, right, is going to be in a way that we want to train in a way that's going to build muscle, right? So that's the kind of style of training that we want to do there, right? Bodybuilding style training, muscle growth training, whatever you want to call it there. And so I'm going to go over the common splits, how I adjust these based on goals, minimums that I want to hit each week in terms of how to break that down, and then some movement patterns that you want to include in it. So really everything you need to know about splits for a body recomp here on this. All right, so let's go with the common split. So what I'll typically see for most clients is 3 to 4 days. Very rarely will I see somebody do 5. I have some clients that do 5. For most people who have a life outside of the gym, we're looking at 3 to 4 days of training per week. Okay. So really what that means is basically for 3 days, what I commonly do there is going to be like a full body upper lower split. For 4 days, I'm going to do something like an upper lower split. And then it's usually that lower day is usually going to have upper lower in it, right? And then you would do that twice per week. Again, they would be 4 different workouts, but it'd be upper lower from that perspective. Okay. So those are the most common splits in how I program it. Now, what I am going to go over is like minimums that I want to hit each week from a muscle building standpoint in terms of like sets and frequency of training and everything like that. And so I'm going to go over how this could potentially change, but these are the splits that I found to be the most effective there. And then basically from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust this based on goals. So if somebody is more lower body focused, when we're going to do lower upper, off, lower upper. Okay. For the 3-day split, it's probably going to be a lower upper full body or a full body upper lower, full body lower upper there on that. So again, we're just that would be an example of how I'm moving things around, but it would probably be if somebody wanted to focus on their upper, then it'd be an upper, lower, full body. So again, that's just how I would break that down and move things around. And then within that, say, for example, if we're doing 2 upper per week, 2 lower per week, whatever your main muscle group that you want to focus on would be the one that we would do first for that week. So if it's like, hey, I want to focus on my back. All right, that first upper workout's going to lead with a back exercise. And then that second one's probably going to lead with a push type of exercise. But again, that just really depends on the person there. And then vice versa, if somebody really wants to build their glutes, well, our first movement, the first lower workout of the week is going to have glutes be the first thing that they're going to train for that day. And then, like I said, some of these lower body days will have a little bit of upper built into them. And then potentially for some people, depending on their goals, the upper days could have a little bit of lower body built into it. Again, I think the big mistake people make with splits is they try to pigeonhole themselves into something where it's like upper, lower. So then they only do upper on that day and only do lower on that day. And that can work. We could probably be a little bit more effective with our programming. And I'm going to go over these minimums I want to hit. And then that's where I land on doing some upper on your lower day and then potentially some lower on your upper day, depending on the person, right? But really the main takeaway is that just because it says upper doesn't mean there can't be a little bit of lower in there. And just because it says lower doesn't mean there can't be a little bit of upper body stuff in there. It's just that's the priority for the day, and that's where the bulk of like the intensity and the volume is going to be, is towards those whatever area that is specifically. Let's go over minimums, right? So because again, when I'm breaking this down, I hate to pigeonhole people into, oh hey, today's just an upper day, you just need to do upper. We're going to base this off of goals. We're also going to base this off of recovery. If you're recovered for certain muscle groups, we don't necessarily have to pigeonhole ourselves into, oh hey, you can only train this muscle group this day. That's probably one thing that I've, looking back on when I first got into fitness and everything, it was like thinking there's this like magic combo of doing certain muscle groups. Oh, that guy does back and buys together, or that guy does chest and back together. That's why he looks that way. And that's not really the case, right? Really what we want to do with programming is find ways to hit these minimums I'm about to go over, and then take the person's goal into consideration and how we can fit that into the time they need to spend training, and the time that they can spend to training in however many days that is, right? And so think of it as a puzzle where we're just trying to put the pieces together there versus, oh, hey, this is upper, lower, just do that. Again, that will work, and that's better than you just being random with your training. But again, we don't need to pigeonhole ourselves into these things. So again, that's where I come back to. Some of my upper days may have a little bit of lower in it. Some of my lower days may have a little bit of upper in it. All right, so let's talk about minimums that we want to hit here. When I'm building out a program for muscle growth, what are the things I want to hit? So it's typically we're looking at a minimum of somewhere around 6 to 10 sets per muscle group per week. Okay. Some people it's going to be a little bit higher. Some muscle groups may be a little bit higher, but to start, I think 6 to 10 is that sweet spot to hit is a minimum, right? So from there, it's okay. How many days per week are you training? Okay. You can do 4, 6 to 10 sets. Now we got to figure out how to fit that into those 4 days. And then from there, ideally we're hitting each muscle group twice a week. Okay. So now we can again break this down to, you could see you could see this imbalance of like, if we're going to do 6 to 10 sets, you're going to have this imbalance on like your lower body days where maybe you're only doing 4 or 5 exercises. And then on your upper body days, you're doing like 8 to 10. So again, we can balance this out a little bit by splitting those up. So what I'll commonly do here is, for example, on lower days, you'll see maybe at the end of your workout, some delt work in there. Maybe you'll see some arm stuff, right? And that helps us fit everything in to a program. So those are the main 2 things that I'm looking at. I want to get 6 to 10 sets per week. And then I want to make sure we're hitting each muscle group twice a week. So we're splitting those 6 to 10 sets up into 2 separate workouts. Ideally, we're working mostly in like the 6 to 15 rep range on these, right? So that's another kind of thing that I'm trying to do here from that perspective. And then we just want to make sure that not getting like any overlapping soreness with any muscle groups, right? So we will want to pay attention to that. So those are minimums that I'm hitting from a muscle growth standpoint, right? In terms of programming. So that's where you can see now how I fall with, I think that full body upper lower split's great, because then again, you're able to hit each muscle group 2 times per week, right? And again, even on that upper, maybe we get a little bit of lower, or maybe on that lower, we get a little bit of upper. So you can see here where I think getting into this like thought of like full body training, a lot of people say, oh, full body, should I do full body training? Should I not? And it really just comes down to, I don't think we need to pigeonhole ourselves into being like, okay, full body, so we have to hit each muscle group X amount of time, or we have to hit each muscle group every single time we go in, right? It's, hey, you got to do triceps, you got to do biceps. There's some overlapping in that as well too, right? A lot of your pulling stuff's going to hit some of your biceps. A lot of your pushing is going to hit some of your triceps, right? So we start to get this indirect sets thrown in there from that perspective. And then also, if you again squat, like I said, you don't have to sit there and do each muscle group through the entire day. You could do a little bit of, say, maybe you have quad, maybe you have mostly legs, but then you throw a little bit of back. Like, to me, that's still a full body workout, right? So again, basically what I'm trying to get at here is we just want to be careful with that terminology on these things from that perspective. So that's how I go about that. Now, what I want to wrap up with here is like, I want to go over movement patterns to maximize lower body and upper body development. Okay. Because again, not only are people going to get caught up in this, oh, hey, you need to do chest and back together, or you need to do full body, and we pigeonhole ourselves into these things. So I went over how we can work around that, how to build out a program. And now what I want to go in next is movement patterns. I like to think in movement patterns versus, hey, you need to do this movement, you need to do that movement. Again, we want to look for these movement patterns. So then that way you can build your program around that. And then we can check these off of, okay, hey, I want to build my quads. All right, I probably want to include this and this in there. And then if I have that, it's now just about doing those exercises over time, finding whether cable works best for it, a machine you like best, maybe it's switching it around. Then you can fill in the gaps with the particular exercises, but we want to hit these movement patterns to make sure we're not missing out on anything from a muscle building standpoint. Because as more research comes out on muscle growth, it is important to make sure you're hitting these, right? So for example, if you do a squat's going to be great, it's going to build a lot of mass, but it doesn't hit, say, your rectus femoris, right? That's that middle muscle in your quad. And so that's why we would want to throw in some leg extensions in there. Whereas, so again, in the past, all you need is squats, or hey, you just need to just hit exercises that hit that muscle group and you're good to go. But it's, hey, we probably do want to be somewhat specific and we want to have some variety in adding in some of these extra things is important. So that's where I think this part of it. All right. So we have the categories. Category 1 here is staples for lower body. So we want to make sure we include at least one squat pattern in each client's program. Okay. We want to make this quad dominant. So we want to make sure the knees are coming forward slightly. So this is where if you do a back squat, something like a low bar squat, again, if you're just trying to increase your 1 rep max on the squat, then okay, maybe that's something that you would do. But if we're trying to build our body here, we're trying to get a recomp, we're more focused on like our the aesthetic side of things. You want to get a squat movement that's going to be more quad focused. And again, that's where we want those knees to travel forward. So we're looking at things like back squats, leg presses, pendulum squats, hack squats, right? We're usually at least getting one of those in the client's programming. And for back squats or any of these, having something that elevates your heels can also be super helpful. So that's the first staple. But like I said, the downside with squat patterns is that they're not going to effectively hit the rectus femoris and they're not going to hit the hamstrings. So because of that, we need to make sure those muscle groups get hit. And then a squat pattern will hit the glutes somewhat, right? And so they are a great lower body exercise, but for maximal muscle development, they aren't the only thing that we need to do. So again, we need to find things that maybe hit the glutes a little bit more directly, hit the hamstrings, and then also hit that rectus femoris. So next we have a hip hinge movement, okay? So this is going to be a hip dominant movement pattern. This movement's important because it's going to hit things like your hamstrings, your glutes, and erector spinae. So that kind of stabilizer muscle around your spine. However, the hip hinge does not do a great job of hitting a part of the hamstrings, okay? So because of that, we might want to include some hamstring curls, right? So it's like now we're going deeper. So the hip hinge is going to hit the hamstrings, which didn't get hit in the squat. It is also, again, going to hit the glutes. So you can see where the glutes start to get indirectly hit a lot here with this. But the hip hinge does not effectively hit the biceps femoris of the hamstring. So again, example movements here are going to be like Romanian deadlifts and good mornings. So those are the 2 staples. If you only had X amount of time to train and you could only do 2 movements, we're going to do a hip hinge and we're going to do a squat. Okay. But if we have more time, which more people do, now we want to throw in these kind of next category. This is category 2, movements based on time. We want to do some sort of knee extension. Okay. The most common exercise here is leg extension. Things like sissy squats also work here. But this is going to hit the rectus femoris, the muscle in the middle of the quads, which does not get hit in your squat pattern. And this is going to help with overall quad development. Can you go without it? Yes. But again, if we're really trying to maximize our quad development, how our quad muscles look, we definitely want to make sure we include this movement. Next, we have knee flexion. Okay, so this would be something like a lying or seated leg curl. And again, this can be a great way to further develop your hamstrings because hip hinges do not hit the short head of the bicep femoris there. However, if we want to break this down, doing seated leg curl may be more effective at building muscle in the hamstrings than the lying leg curl. So again, even to break that down even more. But from my understanding, the lying leg curl is going to hit the sartorius muscle best. And again, there is benefit to doing lying leg curl as well too in a program. But we do want to make sure we get some sort of knee flexion in, right? Because this is, again, going to fully develop your hamstring muscle there. Next is going to be some sort, at least one single leg kind of lunge type movement, right? You can make this either more quad or glute focused based on your goals and preferences and needs. So if you want something to be a little bit more glute focused, that's going to be where maybe we get a little bit more stretch in the back there. Your knee is staying over your toe from that perspective, right? And then if we want to make it more glute quad focused, this is where you're going to have your knees travel forward, right? Using some heel elevation can be super helpful in maintaining a little bit more of a straight torso on that. And then lastly, this leads me to category 3, which is just based on needs, wants, and time. This is where we're going to add in things like hip extension, glute type stuff, right? Things like hip thrust, glute bridge, kickbacks. And the reason this is in the third category is because, as I mentioned earlier, your glutes are going to get hit by squats patterns, are going to get hit by in the hip hinge as well too. There's going to be a lot of carryover there. If you do some single leg stuff and you make it more glute focused, where you're obviously hitting your glutes there. So this is where adding in these kind of extra stuff like hip extension and glute stuff is going to be key to if you really want to build your glutes. If a guy comes to me and he's not really overly concerned about his glutes, we're going to do all these other things and we're probably going to skip out on the hip extension, glute extra stuff, right? Whereas if a female comes to me and she wants to work on her glutes, this is where we'll probably, and that she has a time, we're going to find ways to get this into the program, right? And we have calf stuff. Again, this is the same thing where it's like a lot of women don't really care about calves. Some do, right? I don't want to say that for sure straight across the board, but doing calf stuff, but guys are more concerned about their calves. So again, if we have the time, we're going to add those in from that perspective. So those are the lower body movement patterns that we want to have in your training program. And the next we have upper body, right? So again, we're going to go with the staples first. So we have pushing. Anything that you are pushing the weight away from your body. So men may opt for more chest work over women. Again, I have a lot of women that don't really necessarily care about working their chest, which is fine. And so women may do more like vertical pressing, like shoulder press, or like high incline pressing over men who may do more flat pressing, low incline pressing, incline pressing, and then maybe a little bit less like shoulder pressing, right? Because they're going to get their front delts hit a lot with a lot of that chest work that they're doing. So for men, I typically do about 75% of chest movement to vertical overhead movement, sometimes 100%, just depending on how much they want their chest to grow. And then women, it's typically the opposite, right? So it's like 75% is going to be overhead pressing type movements, and then maybe 25% is going to be some sort of chest movement from that perspective. So again, some of your pressing may hit your triceps slightly, but direct tricep work is really what's going to maximize triceps. And all pressing is going to hit your anterior delts as well too, right? So that's where I'm saying we don't want to do 4 exercises for our chest and then 4 exercises for overhead pressing, because that's just going to be a lot on your front delts. All right, so next we have rows. So 50% of back training is going to be a row variation. To make it, we can bias it more towards lat or upper back. So lat's going to be elbows in closer to your body and not letting your arms go too far past your body, and thinking about driving your elbows and dumbbells to your hips. Upper back's going to be your elbows flared out more. You're going to have more of a proud chest when you pull, right? To break down back training, 50% is going to be rows. Within that 50%, we can break it down to more lat focus or more upper back focus. Next, we have pull downs and vertical pulling. So this is the other 50% of back training. You can bias the lats more or upper back more the same way you would do it with your rows, right? Elbows in closer to the body, hands more shoulder width apart, and drive elbows down into the hips for more lat focus. For more upper back focus, we're going to do elbows flared out a bit more, and we're going to have that kind of proud chest there. Think about wrapping your elbows around your body. Some pulling movements may hit your biceps slightly, but if you want to maximize biceps, we need to make sure we do direct bicep work. So I actually threw side lateral raises in the staples just because a lot of people want to build their delts. And if we're just doing like shoulder pressing, yeah, you'll hit those side delts a little bit there. But to really maximize your side delts, you want to hit some lateral raise variations. So these are really in all clients' programs, unless they have some sort of injury. Just because, again, I think developing your shoulders is key for having that, just having that kind of look that people want, right? Where they have a little bit more broader shoulders, a little bit more of a skinnier, kind of waist, right? So things taper in a little bit there. So again, side lateral raises are high on the priority list. So now we go into category 2, right? So this is the same thing as like the leg extension for the lower body. This is in 95% of programs. So biceps, right? Any sort of bicep work, right? If you want to build your arms, we need to throw in some direct work here. So this can really be any form of curls. What I will say is, to take this to the next level, is make sure you get some sort of bicep training in there where you bias that position at the bottom where your biceps are stretched, right? So like a face away cable curl is perfect. Preacher curls, where you really focus on that bottom range of motion, are also great from this perspective. I would say you make sure you at least do one of those, and then the rest of the time you can do really any form of bicep curling that you enjoy. So the next one would be any type of tricep work, right? Triceps are going to get indirectly hit with any pressing movement, but again, if we want to really build our triceps, we want to get some direct tricep work in there, right? So we want to find at least 1 to 2 exercises that hit the triceps in their lengthened position. So anything where we can get overhead, at least make sure you have at least 1 to 2 of those in your program. So then the category 3, again, this is just on an individual basis, right? This is the same as like the calves and the glutes. So if somebody has time to do it, they want to do it, we'll obviously throw this in. And these are just things like traps, forearms, and abs, right? Because a lot of people think they need to do abs, but you don't necessarily need to do abs. You can get away with not doing abs and you'll be fine. Same thing with forearms. It's okay. They get hit indirectly so much there. So that was my long-winded answer of how I go about programming, right? So those are all things I'm considering. So hopefully this gives you some more insight into how to program for yourself for muscle building there. If you have any questions on this, just reach out and I'm more than happy to answer this for you. All right. So the second question of the day is benefits of metabolic training phases, how to implement them. So essentially metabolic training phases, how I see them, you could ask somebody else and they may think of this slightly different. I just think of this type of training as that pump style training, high rep, going for the burn, short rest times, right? That's what I imagine metabolic training being. Again, you may talk to somebody else and they may say it's something else, right? But I think generally speaking, that's what most people are saying when they're talking about metabolic training. So again, with all this, okay, what is your overarching goal? Is it to build muscle, improve your looks, have that more toned look? Well then, okay, so we know that building muscle is your priority. Because again, it's important to make that clear of what your main goal is in terms of If it's a performance-based thing, you don't really need to do metabolic style training, right? If it's strength, like if your main goal is strength and you just want to get as strong as possible, then again, you don't need to do metabolic style training, right? So I think it's important to break that down. And so I think really one of the benefits of it is it's just a slightly different stimulus from your normal, say, 5 to 12 rep range. And it just adds a little bit of novelty to your programming, which could be good. It could be bad, right? Or I don't want to say it could be bad, but that could be good, or it's just neutral. So I think that's the main benefit is it's just a slightly different stimulus, some novelty that maybe if you're always training in that 5 to 12 rep range, going into these rep ranges, say 12, 20 plus reps, shorter rest time, things like that. Like it's just probably a slightly different stimulus. And it would be a nice thing to potentially just add it in or take a break from, say, that normal 5 to 12 rep range style training if you're always doing that. In saying this, a couple other things I want to mention on this is I don't ever program just like metabolic phases, right? If I'm going to do something like this, it's going to usually be something that's thrown in. We're going to have a good base of that 5 to 12 rep range, and this is going to be thrown in on top of it, right? Or maybe we have some exercises where we go higher rep ranges, right? So like something like a squat, that's not going to be a good exercise to do, say, metabolic training with. You'd want to do this with like machine-based stuff, body weight type stuff, things like that, right? But again, I'll never just do straight, oh, hey, everything we're doing this phase is just metabolic style training, right? It's going to have a good base of that hypertrophy training, and we're going to add this in on top of it. And then towards the end of a training cycle, I'm usually going to add in things like drop sets and myo rep sets as a way to get a little bit more volume in a short amount of time. But I do this towards the end of the training cycle. We're not usually don't do it the entire time. Sometimes I will, but for the most part, I'll throw this in at the end. And again, that's just a way to get extra volume in. And again, to add in that extra different stimulus from what you've typically been doing. But my other kind of thought on this too is that this type of training, from my understanding, it's going to be something that only works in the short term, right? Like your body kind of adapts to it pretty quickly. So this is why I like to do it like towards the last 2 to 3 weeks of a training cycle, take a break for 3 to 5 weeks, and then come back to it. So again, this is why I'm not a fan of having an entire phase of this. But again, some people may disagree with that, and they may do that. So again, I may throw some of these phases. I may do some phases where we do these slightly higher rep ranges, but again, we're still having that good base of your hypertrophy style training. That still needs to be the bulk of what you do throughout the year, is just that 5 to 12, 5 to 15, 5 to 12 rep range where you're just focused on you're getting enough rest in between most of the time in between. You're getting close to failure on it, right? Anywhere from 0 to 3 reps. Again, that's going to be the bulk of our training. And then maybe we sprinkle in some of this metabolic type training from time to add in some novelty. Obviously, for the client, it can be fun to add in that from time to time too. But the research on periodization for hypertrophy I don't think there's a lot of research on it, and it's not conclusive that, hey, you need to do this work, do hypertrophy training for this amount of time, then you need to do more strength, then you need to do this, right? I think that just comes down to preference and, again, the psychological side of things, where switching things up can be mentally just engaging for the client versus like always doing 5 to 8 reps. Again, that can get boring. So that's where I see the benefit of this phase. Again, slightly beneficial from like a novelty standpoint, slightly different stimulus, but at the end of the day, it's not necessary and you don't have to do it. But it can be a great way to change up training from time to time. Okay, so last question of the day is, I'm really happy where I'm at, but am doing more activity than is feasible. How can I maintain? So I'm assuming that this person wants to maintain their like current body composition. You go from doing X amount of activity to now you're dropping down. How are you going to maintain that? Because you're moving so much, that's making up for the amount of calories that you're eating. And so unfortunately, you are just going to have to do some trial and error here with this. But in saying this, to be safe, you can make a small decrease in calories to make up for less activity. But that may not be the case either. You may find that you move less and nothing really changes, right? Because sometimes when we move more, we exercise more, our hunger response will increase to that, and you almost end up eating more calories than you think. Whereas like subconsciously. Whereas if you don't make a change, you're moving less. Now you're not going to you're in that sweet spot of like your body, you're getting the benefits of the satiety aspect of movement, but you're also not getting that increased hunger response because you're expending so much energy, right? Unfortunately, at the end of the day, you're just going to have to do some trial and error here and see what happens. So if this were me, and I knew I was making a big decrease in movement, I would probably drop calories by maybe 200, maybe less than that. and just take some data for a couple weeks and see what happens. But I also may not even make that decrease and just see what happens, because like I said, you could potentially not have anything change. Also, too, one thing I want to mention on this is also the exercise, what that activity is also going to be important. If it's, okay, you're doing 6 days a week of weight training and now you're going down to 3, I'm definitely not going to make an adjustment from a calorie standpoint, because you really don't expend that much energy in your weight training sessions. Now, if you're going from, say, 12,000 steps now down to 6,000, that might be something where I do make a small adjustment, because that's going to have a larger impact on my day-to-day there. Or if you're somebody who's running a marathon and you're training for a marathon and you're running 20 plus miles a week and now you're going down to 0, again, that I would probably want to potentially account for that. So I think it is very dependent on what you're doing, what that activity is as well too, is also important. This is where I do want to plug my nutrition periodization masterclass. So I do go over like whatever phase you're in. So if it is maintenance, I go over how to make some adjustments to make sure that you're staying on track. So that would be something that I would definitely go and check out. And again, the link to that is in the show notes. So that's it for this episode. If you found this podcast to be helpful in any way, if you could leave a rating and review, and that will help more people find this podcast. Again, I appreciate everybody who listens, but obviously want to continue to grow it. I do have my free masterclass on body recomp. So what it is, how to do it. The link to that is in the show notes. And then I also have my free masterclass on nutrition periodization that I just talked about. Again, the link to that is in the show notes as well too. If you haven't yet, give me a follow on Instagram, Jeff HOEHN_. That's where I'm most active on social media. You can ask me any questions if there's anything on the podcast that didn't make sense. And then lastly, if you have questions on how to do your programming, how to make adjustments to your training or to your activity when you're not sure on how to do that, then my free 30-minute strategy calls for you. The link to that is in the show notes as well too. So that's it for this episode. If you guys have any questions, let me know. I'll talk to you soon.